The boy's fingers stopped less than an inch from the fresh loaf. His hand shook so badly that the bread almost rolled from the wooden crate by itself. Before he could pull away, the store owner's rough hand closed around his wrist. "Stealing? I didn't. You were about to. I stopped. You stopped because I caught you." "No." The owner tightened his grip. "Then why?" The boy lowered his eyes. "Because it isn't mine." People turned from wagons and hitching posts. The small crowd formed quickly. Nobody asked how old the child was. Nobody wondered why his clothes barely fit or why his boots were held together with twine. One farmer laughed. "Look at him." Another folded his arms. "Throw him out. Teach him now. He'll only come back." The boy stayed silent. His stomach growled loudly enough for everyone to hear. A few people smiled. One woman looked away, pretending not to notice. Across the dusty street, a rancher stood beside his horse. He had only come to buy seed and lamp oil. Instead, he watched the boy without moving. He noticed the hollow cheeks first, then the dirt beneath the broken fingernails, then something stranger. The child barely looked at the bread. His eyes stayed fixed on a young mother sitting outside the store. She gently rocked a baby while feeding the little one a bottle of warm milk. The child swallowed hard as he watched the baby drink. Not jealous. Hungry enough to forget the bread. The rancher crossed the street. The crowd quieted. The store owner looked at him. "You know this boy?" "No." "You want him?" I asked first. The rancher looked directly at the child. "How long since you ate?" The boy answered without lifting his head. "Yesterday." "What did you eat?" "A potato." "Only one?" "Yes." The rancher nodded slowly. "Family?" The answer came after a long silence. "Don't know name? I remember Eli. You remember? I don't remember the rest." The rancher studied the child's face. There was no fear inside it anymore. Fear had been replaced by something worse. The boy expected nothing. The store owner released his wrist. "You paying for what he almost stole?" "He never stole it." He reached. He stopped. The owner shrugged. "Makes no difference." "It does." Without another word, the rancher stepped inside. The bell above the door rang once. He returned carrying the fresh loaf. Then a sack of dried beans. Then strips of smoked meat wrapped in brown paper. He held everything toward the boy. "Take it." The boy stepped backward. "I didn't earn it." "You can how?" "By eating." The child frowned as if the answer made no sense. "I can't pay. I'm not asking. I'll owe you." "No, I don't like owing." The rancher looked at him for a long moment. "Neither do I." The silence between them felt older than either one expected. Finally, the boy accepted the bread with both hands. He treated it carefully, almost like it could disappear if he squeezed too hard. He still didn't eat. The rancher noticed. "What now?" The child looked toward the edge of town. "I'm making sure nobody else needs it." The rancher followed his eyes. Nobody stood there. Only empty road. "You don't have to save it." "I always save half." "For who?" The boy hesitated. "I forget." The answer landed somewhere deep inside the rancher. Years earlier there had been another child. Smaller hands, smaller boots waiting beside his front door. Toys still sitting untouched inside an empty bedroom. He pushed the memory away every morning because it hurt too much to carry. Now it returned anyway. The boy slowly broke the loaf in half. He wrapped one piece inside his shirt. Only then did he eat, not fast, not wild, small, bites, careful bites, like someone afraid the food might be taken back. The rancher looked away before anyone noticed the sadness in his face. The whispers began almost immediately. "Bad idea. Strangers always bring trouble. He'll rob the ranch or burn it. Kids like that don't come from nowhere." The rancher ignored every voice. He picked up the sack of beans. "You riding?" "I can walk. It's a long road. I've walked longer." The rancher untied the reins. "My horse doesn't mind." The boy hesitated again. "I've never ridden one. Today you do." The child looked at the horse almost as carefully as he had looked at the bread. "Will it throw me?" "No." "How do you know?" "Because I asked nicely." For the first time, something almost became a smile. Almost the rancher helped him climb into the saddle. The boy gripped tightly. You nervous? Yes. So is the horse. The child blinked. Really? No. A tiny laugh escaped before he could stop it. The sound surprised both of them. The rancher mounted behind him. The crowd watched in silence now. No one offered help. No one wished them well. Across the street, the sheriff leaned against the wall outside the jailhouse. His badge caught the afternoon light, but his face stayed hidden beneath the brim of his hat. He never looked at the rancher. He stared only at the boy. His eyes narrowed, not with anger. Recognition, the rancher felt it immediately. He guided the horse forward. The sheriff finally spoke. Quietly, too quietly. That boy wasn't supposed to come back. The rancher slowly turned toward him. The rancher slowly turned toward him. The sheriff did not move from the wall outside the jail. His face stayed calm, but his eyes never left the boy sitting on the horse. The rancher waited before speaking. What did you mean? The sheriff shrugged. Forget him. I won't. Then you'll regret it. You know him? I know enough. Tell me no. Why not? Because some things stay buried. The rancher's jaw tightened. Children shouldn't be buried while they're breathing. The sheriff looked away first. You've been warned. Without another word, the rancher pulled gently on the reins. The horse started down the road leading away from town. He never looked back, but he could still feel the sheriff watching them. The feeling stayed with him long after the buildings disappeared behind the hills. The boy sat quietly in front of him. One hand held the piece of bread wrapped inside his shirt. The other rested carefully against the saddle. Every few minutes he took another small bite. He chewed slowly, making the food last. The rancher finally broke the silence. You always quiet? The boy nodded. Talking got me hit. Who hit you? I don't remember. You remember nothing? The child looked down at the bread. I remember little things. Like what? A fence. What else? A dog. The rancher waited. Was she your mother? I don't know. The road stretched ahead without another traveler. Wind pushed dry grass across the wagon tracks. The horse kept a slow, steady pace. The rancher spoke again. You remember your last name? The boy shook his head. No. Your birthday? No. Where you came from? No. The rancher frowned. There has to be something. The child stayed quiet for several moments. I remember one song. What song? I don't know the words. Can you hum it? The boy closed his eyes for a second. Then he hummed, soft, slow, gentle. The rancher's hands froze on the reins. Every note struck somewhere he had tried not to visit for years. His wife used to hum that same lullaby while standing on the front porch after sunset. She sang it while folding tiny clothes. She sang it while rocking an empty cradle after hope had already slipped away. She never taught it to anyone else. The humming stopped. Was it wrong? The rancher swallowed hard. No. You know it? Yes. My mother sang it? I don't know. The rancher looked toward the road instead of the child. I just know I've heard it before. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the ride. The ranch appeared beyond a line of old cottonwoods. A weathered fence circled wide fields where cattle grazed quietly. Smoke drifted from the stone chimney, though no one had lived there besides the rancher for many years. The boy looked around carefully. This is yours? Yes, it's big. It feels smaller now. The horse stopped beside the porch. The rancher climbed down first and offered his hand. The boy hesitated before taking it. He stepped onto the ground carefully, as if afraid he might not be allowed to stay. The front door opened with a familiar creak. Inside, everything remained exactly where it had been left. The kitchen table, the rocking chair, the old family Bible. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. The rancher watched the boy's eyes wander across the room. He noticed every empty corner, every unused chair, every picture frame turned face down. The child never asked about them. Instead, he noticed a small hallway. At the end stood a bedroom with the door partly open. He walked toward it slowly. The rancher followed. Inside, dust rested over tiny shelves and folded blankets. A faded quilt covered a narrow bed that had never been slept in again. Wooden toys still waited exactly where they had been placed years before. The boy picked up a small wooden horse. He turned it over in both hands. It still rolls. The wheels spun softly. The rancher nodded. It always did. The boy carefully placed it back where he found it. He touched nothing else. I can sleep outside. No, I don't mind. I'll make the house dirty. The rancher looked around the silent room. It's already lonely. The child lowered his head. I've never slept inside a real house. You will tonight. I don't know the rules. There aren't many. What if I break something? Then we'll fix it. The answer seemed to confuse the boy. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way. The rancher showed him the wash basin, fresh towels, a clean shirt, a pair of worn trousers that had once belonged to another child. They might fit. I don't deserve these. You don't have to deserve clean clothes. The boy nodded quietly. Night settled over the ranch without a sound except crickets beyond the porch. After supper, the child fell asleep almost immediately in the small bedroom near the kitchen. The rancher checked on him before putting out the lamps. The blanket had slipped from the boy's shoulders. He stepped closer to pull it back into place. That was when he saw them. Scars, not long marks from a whip round burns. Small circles, each one carefully placed, some connected into strange shapes. Others looked almost like letters that had faded with time. The rancher's breathing slowed. Someone had done this on purpose, not in anger, with patience, almost like branding cattle. His hand stopped just above one scar but never touched it. The boy stirred in his sleep. The rancher quietly covered him again and walked outside. The night felt strangely still. He stood on the porch listening. At first he heard nothing, then one faint sound, a boot scraping dirt beyond the fence. He turned sharply. "Who's there?" No answer. Only darkness. He stepped into the yard. The trees stood perfectly still. Far beyond the barn, a shadow slipped behind the fence posts. The rancher took another step. The shadow disappeared. A moment later, unseen footsteps faded into the distance until even the silence swallowed them whole. The rancher stepped farther into the yard after the last footsteps disappeared into the darkness. His eyes searched the fence, the trees, and the empty road beyond the pasture. Nothing moved. The wind carried no voices. Whoever had stood outside the house was already gone. He walked toward the fence anyway. Near one of the fence posts he stopped. Boot prints, fresh, small, too small for any grown man. He crouched beside them. Not a child's bare feet, old boots, worn soles. Someone young had been watching the ranch. He followed the tracks for several yards until they vanished over hard ground. No more signs, no answers. The rancher looked back toward the house. One lamp still glowed through the window beside the kitchen. Inside, the boy slept peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. The rancher stayed outside until dawn. Morning arrived quietly. The cattle wandered toward the watering trough. Birds settled along the fence rails. The smell of coffee drifted through the open kitchen window. The boy walked outside wearing the clean clothes. They fit. They do. I folded the blanket. I noticed. I wasn't sure if I should. You did right. The boy glanced toward the barn. Am I staying? For now. You still don't know me? No. You trust me? The rancher thought for a moment. I trust what I saw. What did you see? A hungry boy who wouldn't steal. The child lowered his eyes. After breakfast, the rancher saddled the horse. We're riding again? Yes. Where? Church. The boy looked confused. I do something wrong? No, I've never been inside one. You don't have to pray. What do I do? Just stay beside me. The church sat near the center of town. Its white walls looked clean, but its wooden doors carried years of scratches. Inside, dust floated through quiet sunlight. The pastor looked up from a stack of old books. Morning! Morning! The pastor smiled until he noticed the boy. His smile faded. What brings you here? The rancher stepped closer. I'm looking for records. What kind? A child. The pastor folded his hands. Name? Eli. The pastor's eyes shifted for only a second. No, Eli. You checked already? I remember every family. I'm asking you to check again. The pastor sighed. There isn't one. The rancher looked toward the shelves filled with thick record books. I'll look myself. The pastor hesitated. Those are private. So are children. Silence filled the room. Finally, the pastor stepped aside. Don't make a mess. The rancher opened one heavy book after another. Births, marriages, deaths. Years passed beneath his fingers. Nothing. Then another book older. Its leather cover was cracked with age. One page stopped him. A single name, Ilias, no last name. No parents listed, no birthplace. Only one sentence declared deceased. The date was years earlier. The rancher frowned. Pastor. The old man slowly walked over. Yes? Who's Elias? I don't know. He's buried, so it says. You signed this. The pastor stared at the page, his face turned pale. I don't remember. You signed it. I signed many things. This child had no family. The pastor swallowed. It was a long time ago. The rancher closed the book. I want to see the grave. The pastor looked toward the door. You should leave it alone. I won't. The boy spoke softly. My name was Eli. The pastor looked at him, long hard, then quickly looked away. I'll show you. The cemetery rested behind the church on a small hill. Weathered stones leaned in every direction. Wild grass covered forgotten names. The pastor stopped near the far fence. There, a narrow headstone stood alone. Gray, fresh. The rancher walked toward it. The boy followed closely. The words carved into the stone were short. Elias, beloved child, nothing else, no family, no dates except the year of death. The rancher looked down. Something felt wrong. He knelt. The dirt beneath the stone had settled for many years, yet the marker itself showed almost no weather. Its edges remained sharp, its letters clean. He touched the ground, hard, undisturbed. No signs the earth had ever been opened. He stood slowly. This grave is lying. The pastor stepped backward. You shouldn't say that. Why? Because dead children deserve peace. This child never came here. The pastor said nothing. A familiar voice interrupted. Walk away. The sheriff stood near the cemetery gate. His hat shadowed his face. One hand rested near his belt. The rancher faced him. No, I wasn't asking. I noticed. The sheriff stepped closer. You don't understand this place? Then explain it. I can't. You won't. They're the same thing. The rancher folded his arms. I found a dead boy who isn't dead. You found a name. I found a lie. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Go home. No. The sheriff slowly placed one hand on his badge. The metal caught the morning light. The rancher never moved. So will I. Neither man spoke. The pastor quietly backed away. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Power shifted without a single hand being raised. For the first time, the sheriff looked uncertain. The rancher stayed exactly where he stood. Beside the grave, beside the boy, the child stared at the headstone without blinking. His breathing became uneven. I've seen this place before. The rancher looked down. When? I don't know. What do you remember? His voice trembled. He reached toward the stone. His fingers rested lightly against the cold surface. The moment he touched it, his eyes widened. His whole body stiffened. A sound rushed into his mind. Not wind, not thunder. A woman screaming. One long, desperate scream that echoed through his memory, till he covered both ears and stumbled backward, unable to understand why it felt so terribly familiar. The boy collapsed beside the grave. The rancher dropped to his knees and caught him before his head struck the stone. The child's eyes stayed open, but they looked past everything around him. His lips trembled. Fire. The rancher held his shoulders. Ellie? The boy breathed harder. Fire? What fire? The child shook his head. I don't know. The sheriff watched without moving. The pastor stood several steps away, pale and silent. Neither man offered help. The rancher looked at them. Help me! Nobody answered. He lifted the boy into his arms. The child felt far too light. As the rancher carried him toward the horse, the sheriff finally spoke. Leave it alone. The rancher never stopped walking. I tried leaving things alone once. The sheriff lowered his eyes. It didn't save anyone. The rancher placed the boy carefully across the saddle before climbing up behind him. The ride home passed in complete silence. Every few minutes the boy whispered the same word: fire. Nothing else. The rancher guided the horse through the ranch gate and carried the child inside. He laid him gently on the bed near the kitchen and covered him with a blanket. His eyes remained closed. His breathing stayed steady. Still, he would not wake. The rancher saddled another horse and rode for the town doctor. The old doctor arrived before sunset carrying a worn leather bag. He checked the boy's pulse, his breathing, his eyes. Then he stepped away. No fever. The rancher frowned. No sickness? The doctor slowly shook his head. Then what's wrong? The old man looked back toward the sleeping child. He remembers. What does that mean? It means the body can survive things the mind cannot. He won't wake. He will. When? I can't answer that. The rancher folded his arms. Can you help him? I already did. You barely touched him. Because medicine isn't what he needs. The doctor closed his bag. Some wounds don't bleed. He left as quietly as he had arrived. Night settled over the ranch once again. The rancher sat beside the bed, listening to the child breathe. Hours passed before he finally stood and walked into the room at the end of the hallway. He had not entered it for months. Dust covered the shelves. The small wooden horse still waited beside the bed. He opened an old cedar chest that had belonged to his wife. Inside rested folded quilts, baby clothes never worn, and a bundle of letters tied together with faded ribbon. He sat slowly and untied them. Most were simple: shopping lists, small reminders, little notes left beside coffee cups years ago. Then he found one that had never been finished. Its edges were burned black. The paper smelled faintly of smoke even after all this time. He unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence had been written. They're taking children. Nothing followed. The page ended there. The fire had eaten the rest. The rancher's hands began to shake. He remembered the night she disappeared, the smoke, the shouting, the search that found nothing. Everyone had called it an accident. He believed them because he had nothing else to believe. Now he wasn't sure. He folded the letter and slipped it carefully into his pocket. Morning came with questions he could no longer ignore. He rode from house to house across the valley. At the first farm, an old man answered the door. I'm looking for answers. I don't have any. Did you know children disappeared years ago? I mind my own business. You should have minded theirs. The door closed. At another house, a woman looked frightened before he even spoke. I can't help you. You haven't heard the question. I don't need to. She shut the curtains. By afternoon, the rancher reached the smallest cabin at the edge of the valley. An elderly woman sat on the porch shelling peas into a tin bowl. She looked at him without surprise. You finally came. You know me. I knew your wife. The rancher froze. You did? The old woman nodded. She asked questions. What happened to her? The woman looked toward the distant hills. They told her to stop. Who? She sighed. They chose silence. Who chose it? The families that own everything. The sheriff? No. The pastor? No. The governor? She remained quiet. The old families, what were they hiding? I've already said too much. I need the truth. The truth costs people. My wife already paid. The old woman's eyes filled with sadness. I know. She stood slowly and carried the bowl inside without another word. The rancher remained on the porch until the screen door closed. He rode home before dark. The ranch looked peaceful from a distance, too peaceful. Then he smelled smoke. His heart pounded. He kicked the horse into a run. Flames climbed from the old barn roof, bright against the evening sky. The cattle had already broken free from the pasture. Horses ran across the fields unharmed. Whoever started the fire had opened every stall. The rancher grabbed buckets from the well and fought the flames alone. Neighbors watched from the road but stayed back. Nobody came close. Nobody offered water. After what felt like hours, the roof collapsed inward with a crash. The fire slowly weakened. The rancher stood before the smoking ruins. His face glowed orange from the last flames. His fists tightened. "I buried enough." His voice barely rose above a whisper. Behind him, the front door opened. The boy stepped onto the porch wrapped in a blanket. He stared at the burning barn with wide eyes. The rancher hurried toward him. "You should be inside." The child never looked away from the fire. His voice was quiet, certain. "I know who started the first fire." The rancher stared at the boy without speaking. Behind them, the last flames curled through the broken beams of the barn before fading into smoke. The child kept watching the ashes as though he could still see something hidden inside them. The rancher stepped closer. "Take me." The boy looked at him. "Where? Where the first fire happened?" The child hesitated. "I don't know if I can. You said you know who started it. I remember a place. Show me. What if I remember something bad?" The rancher rested a hand on his shoulder. "Then you won't remember it alone." The boy nodded. They left before sunrise the next morning. The horse could only carry them so far before the trail disappeared beneath thick brush. They continued on foot through tall trees that shut out most of the morning light. The child walked slowly. Sometimes he stopped. Sometimes he turned in small circles before choosing another direction. "You've been here before?" "I think so." "You aren't sure?" "My feet remember better than my head." The rancher said nothing. The forest grew quieter with every step. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed unwilling to cross that place. The boy finally stopped beside a cluster of leaning stones almost hidden beneath vines. There, the rancher pushed branches aside. An old stone well stood before them. Its walls had cracked with age. Thick weeds wrapped around the stones. Heavy wooden boards covered the opening. Rusted nails held them in place. No bucket remained, no rope. Nothing suggested anyone had drawn water there for years. The rancher knelt beside the edge. "This is it?" The boy nodded. "I remember standing here." "With who?" "I don't know. What happened?" "I hear crying." The rancher gripped the weathered boards. Together they pulled until the old nails snapped free. The cover slid aside with a rough scrape. A cold smell drifted upward. Not fresh earth, not water. Only dust and forgotten years. The rancher leaned over. The well was dry. Its stone walls stretched deep into darkness. He spotted something resting near the bottom. A piece of cloth, then another. "We're going down." The boy grabbed his sleeve. "No, why?" "It doesn't like visitors." "What doesn't?" The child looked into the darkness. "I don't know." The rancher found an old rope tied around a nearby tree. He tested it carefully before lowering himself only a short distance onto a narrow ledge. The well was wider than it first appeared. His boots landed on dry ground. He looked around, silence, nothing else. "Stay there," he called. The boy nodded from above. The rancher picked up the first object, a tiny shoe, small enough for a child no older than 5. Nearby rested another. Not a pair, different sizes, different years. He slowly gathered more shoes, dozens of them, high beneath dirt and fallen stones. His breathing grew heavier. He reached farther into the shadows. Tiny blankets lay folded together as though someone had stacked them long ago. One still carried faded stitching shaped like little stars. Another smelled faintly of smoke. The rancher carefully lifted each one. His hands shook. Children had been here, many children. He found broken lockets next, some empty. Others still held tiny pictures worn almost beyond recognition. One showed a smiling woman holding a baby. The glass had shattered years earlier. The rancher closed it gently. Then his hand brushed against something made of metal. He pulled it free. A sheriff's badge. Old bent dark stains covered one edge. Even after all those years, dried blood still clung inside the engraved lines. The rancher stared at it. He said nothing. Words no longer seemed useful. Above him, the boy whispered into the darkness. "What do you see?" The rancher looked upward but could not answer. Instead, he slowly held up the badge. The child stared at it. His face grew pale. "They cried here." The words barely escaped his mouth. The rancher climbed back to the surface carrying everything he had found. He laid the shoes and blankets across the grass. The badge rested alone. Neither of them touched it again. The sound of horses echoed through the trees. Several riders appeared between the trunks, dark coats, county badges, rifles hanging across their saddles. The man leading them stopped only a few yards away. "You two." The rancher stood. "What do you want?" "Step away from the well." "Why? It isn't your concern." The rancher folded his arms. "It became my concern the moment I found children's things." The rider looked at the scattered evidence. His expression hardened. "This land now belongs to the county." The rancher shook his head. "No, it always did. No, you have no claim here." The rancher stepped directly between the riders and the well. "So do I." The leader's hand drifted toward his revolver. "You don't want trouble. I didn't bring it. You found it." The boy quietly moved behind the rancher. The other riders looked uneasy. One whispered something the leader did not answer. More horses approached from the opposite trail. Townspeople. Word had spread quickly. Farmers. Widows, workers. Even the pastor arrived. Last came the sheriff. He climbed slowly from his horse. His eyes fell upon the old bedge lying in the grass. For one brief moment, all color drained from his face. The rancher picked it up. "You recognize this?" The sheriff remained silent. "Answer me." "Nothing. You wore one like it." Still nothing. The rancher held the blood-stained badge higher for everyone to see. The crowd murmured. The governor's men shifted nervously. The sheriff stared at the ground. He refused to meet the rancher's eyes. Silence spread across the clearing like another warning. The rancher understood then that whatever had happened at the well had reached far beyond one frightened child. It belonged to the whole town. He tied the rope firmly around the old tree once more. The boy grabbed his arm. "Don't! I have to. They'll stop you. They've already tried." The rancher tested the knot. He looked once at the sheriff, once at the governor's men, then into the dry mouth of the forgotten well. Without another word, he wrapped both hands around the rope and slowly lowered himself into the waiting darkness below. The rancher's boots scraped against the rough stone as he lowered himself deeper into the dry well. The circle of daylight above grew smaller with every foot. Dust drifted through the air. The rope swayed gently against the wall until his boots finally touched solid ground. He looked up. The boy leaned over the edge. "You all right?" "For now." "Don't go far. I'll call if I need you." The rancher lifted his lantern and slowly turned. The bottom of the well was wider than it had appeared from above. Loose stones covered the ground. Old scraps of cloth rested beneath layers of dirt. Then he noticed something hidden behind a broken section of the wall. A narrow opening just wide enough for one person. He stepped closer. Cold air flowed from the darkness beyond. Someone had carved the entrance years ago. It was no accident. The rancher ducked inside. The tunnel stretched ahead beneath the earth. Its ceiling remained low, forcing him to bend as he walked. The lantern threw long shadows across the walls. After several yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. He stopped. Small sleeping spaces lined both sides. Not rooms, only shallow places carved into the dirt. Old blankets still lay folded against the walls. A cracked wooden cup rested beside one bed. Tiny shoes sat beneath another. Children had lived here. The rancher swallowed hard. His lantern moved farther across the chamber. Heavy iron chains hung from thick wooden beams driven into the stone. Some lay broken, others remained locked shut. Rust covered every link. He reached toward one chain but pulled his hand back before touching it. The silence inside the tunnel felt heavier than the darkness. He kept walking. The walls slowly changed. Children had scratched words into the stone using nails, rocks, or whatever they could find. Names, dates, small drawings, Sybil prayers. One carving read, "Please find us." Another said, "Mama, I tried." A tiny handprint remained pressed into dried mud. The rancher stood motionless. His lantern reached another message. He froze. Ely lived. The words were uneven, carved by a child's shaking hand. The rancher stopped breathing. He stared at the carving until the letters blurred. Above him, the boy called down, "Are you there?" The rancher forced himself to answer. Yes, what do you see? The truth. The boy climbed down before the rancher could stop him. His boots touched the ground. I didn't want you alone. You should have stayed above. I couldn't. Together they entered the chamber. The boy looked around without speaking. His breathing became faster. His eyes searched every corner. I know this. The rancher stepped beside him. What do you remember? The child closed his eyes. There was another child. A boy? He shook his head. A girl. What was her name? I can't remember. What happened? We sang. What song? The same one. The rancher listened. A woman taught us. What woman? She told us not to cry. The boy pressed both hands against his temples. She said someone would come. Did they? I don't know. His voice cracked. I remember her holding us. The rancher's heart pounded. What did she look like? I can't see her face. What do you remember? A blue scarf. The rancher stared at him. A blue scarf? The child nodded. She wrapped it around the little girl because she was cold. The rancher slowly turned his lantern toward one corner of the chamber. Something rested beneath a pile of fallen stones, a strip of faded blue cloth. His legs weakened. He walked toward it, carefully, slowly. He knelt and lifted it from the dirt. The cloth was worn, smoke-stained. One corner had been repaired by careful stitches. His wife had sewn those stitches herself after catching the scarf on a broken fence years before. He knew every thread. His hands trembled. No. The word escaped before he realized he had spoken. The boy looked at him. What's wrong? The rancher held the scarf against his palm. This belonged to my wife? The woman? I don't know. Could it be? She disappeared. The child looked at the scarf. I think she sang to us. The rancher closed his eyes. For years he had believed the fire took her. Now the scarf rested beneath the ground beside forgotten children. His grief changed shape. It became something colder, something sharper. Footsteps echoed behind them. The rancher turned instantly. The sheriff stood at the tunnel entrance. A revolver pointed toward the floor between them. Not aimed, ready. The lantern light caught the badge on his chest. Leave! The rancher stood. No, you don't know what you're digging up. The rancher held up the blue scarf. I do now. The sheriff's face tightened. His hand shook. You should have listened. I listened for years. You'll destroy this town. No! You'll destroy what's left of it. The rancher stepped forward. You already did. The sheriff looked at the scarf, then at the carvings, then at the chains. His revolver slowly lowered. The metal barrel pointed toward the ground. His shoulders sagged beneath a weight he had carried too long. The boy watched him quietly. You know me. The sheriff closed his eyes. Yes. You left me here? No. You found me? The sheriff nodded once. I found all of you. Then why? His voice broke. Why didn't you help? The sheriff covered his face for a brief moment. I tried. You failed. I know. The rancher waited. The sheriff looked around the chamber. I failed them. Silence settled between the three of them. The confession hung inside the tunnel. Small Cecile. Heavy enough to crush every lie told for years. The rancher spoke quietly. Start talking. The sheriff nodded slowly. I will. Before another word could leave his mouth, a new sound drifted through the darkness. Footsteps, slow, careful. Coming from somewhere deeper inside the hidden tunnel where no light had yet reached. All three turned toward the sound. Nobody spoke. The footsteps came closer. The woman in silence, the footsteps came closer. Nobody moved. The rancher lifted the lantern higher. The sheriff slowly stepped aside, his lowered revolver hanging uselessly at his side. Eli reached for the rancher's sleeve without taking his eyes off the darkness ahead. A figure appeared at the far end of the tunnel, slow, unsteady. An elderly woman emerged from the shadows. Her gray hair fell across her face. Her clothes were patched together from old blankets and worn cloth. Every step looked painful, yet she kept walking until the lantern lit her tired eyes. The rancher spoke first. Who are you? She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Someone they forgot. The sheriff lowered his head. I thought you were gone. I almost was. You escaped. I hid. For all these years? Because nobody believed me. Silence settled over the chamber. The woman looked around at the carvings on the walls. They're still here. The rancher stepped closer. You live down here? I survived down here. Alone? Not at first. The sheriff closed his eyes. The woman turned toward him. You remember. I remember everything. Then stop hiding. The rancher tightened his grip on the lantern. Tell me what happened. She looked directly into his eyes. They sold children. The words echoed through the tunnel. The rancher stared at her. Who? The old families. Why? They wanted money. From who? People who asked no questions. The rancher's voice hardened. The governor? He protected them. The sheriff? He stayed afraid. The sheriff nodded without arguing. I did. You could have stopped them. I should have. You wore the badge. I didn't deserve it. The woman looked away from him. Guilt doesn't bring children home. The rancher glanced toward Eli. The boy stood frozen. The woman suddenly stepped toward him. Her hands trembled. She reached out carefully, almost afraid he might disappear. You survived. Looked confused. Her lips shook. Her lips. You were so little. I don't remember. You used to hold my hand. The boy searched her face. I'm sorry. She smiled through tears. You don't have to be. I wish I remembered. I remember enough for both of us. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She gently touched the side of his face. You always asked for more bread. Ellie frowned. I did? You never kept it. What happened to it? You gave it away. The boy looked down. I still do. I know, she cried harder. The rancher watched quietly. For the first time since meeting the child, he saw proof that Eli had once belonged somewhere. Someone had loved him. Someone had remembered. The rancher stepped closer. My wife. The woman slowly turned. You knew her? Yes. What happened to her? The woman closed her eyes. The question seemed to hurt more than any other. The sheriff remained silent. The lantern flickered softly. Finally, she answered. She found us. The rancher's heart pounded. When? After one of the fires. She came here? Yes. What did she do? She brought food. He swallowed hard. Only food? No. What else? Hope. The tunnel became painfully quiet. The woman looked toward the old blankets resting against the walls. She held frightened children until they slept. The rancher's hands began to shake. She promised she would come back. Did she? She tried. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of blue thread. It matched the scarf. She tore it while lifting a little girl. The rancher stared at it. I searched for her. I know. I never stopped. I know. What happened? The woman looked down. They caught her. The sheriff covered his face. The rancher could barely breathe. They took... Yes? Did she die? The woman answered so quietly he almost missed it. She tried to save every child. Nothing followed, no explanation, no excuse. Only those 6 words. The rancher's knees weakened. He sank onto the cold ground beside the wall. For years he had carried grief without answers. Now the answers had finally come. Not the ones he wanted. The ones he feared. His shoulders shook. He pressed both hands over his face. The tears came without warning, without shame, without stopping. He cried for the woman he loved, for the children trapped beneath the earth, for the years stolen by silence, for the boy standing only a few feet away. Eli slowly walked toward him. He placed one small hand on the rancher's shoulder. I don't remember her. The rancher looked up through his tears. You don't have to. I'm sorry you didn't do this. The boy stayed beside him. Neither of them spoke. The woman watched quietly. So many fathers never came. The rancher wiped his eyes. I won't leave him. I know. You believe me? I believed your wife too. The sheriff finally spoke. I'll tell everyone. The woman looked at him. You should have years ago. I know 22. I was afraid. You let fear become another jail. The sheriff lowered his head again. I won't hide anymore. The woman reached beneath her patched coat. Carefully she removed a folded envelope protected inside a piece of worn cloth. Its edges were faded. Its seal had never been broken. She held it toward the rancher. "I kept this safe." He accepted it with trembling hands. "What is it?" "The last thing she asked me to protect." He stared at the handwriting on the front. He recognized it instantly. It belonged to his wife. Her final letter rested in his hands. The rancher opened the letter with shaking hands. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting was clear. He recognized every curve of every word before he read the first line. "If you're reading this, I couldn't save them all." His breathing caught. The tunnel around him disappeared. For a moment there was only her voice inside his mind. "I found children hidden beneath the old well. They are afraid, hungry, and forgotten. The families who rule this valley sell them like livestock. The governor protects them. The sheriff knows more than he says. There are still good people, but fear has made them quiet. If I fail, the records are hidden beneath the church floor inside the old wooden chest. Do not let them bury these children twice." The letter ended with only 3 words. "Keep fighting. Always." The rancher folded the paper carefully. He pressed it against his chest and closed his eyes. Then he stood. "We're leaving." The sheriff nodded. "It's time." The elderly woman followed beside Eli as they climbed from the tunnel. One by one they emerged into the daylight. The crowd waiting around the well grew silent the moment they saw the rancher's face. He climbed onto a large stone beside the well. "I have the truth," nobody answered. He held up the letter. "My wife wrote this before they took her." The pastor stepped closer. "What does it say?" "It says this town has been living inside a lie." The sheriff removed his hat. "It tells the truth." The crowd looked at him in disbelief. A farmer spoke first. "You knew?" The sheriff answered quietly. "Yes." "You let it happen?" "I was afraid." "You wore the badge." "I know." The silence broke apart. Voices rose from every side. "You should have stopped them." "My daughter vanished. My nephew disappeared. They told us wolves took him. They lied." The rancher raised one hand. "Listen." The crowd slowly quieted. "No more hiding." One merchant shook his head. "We'll lose everything." The rancher looked directly at him. "You already did." Nobody argued. The words settled over the gathering like heavy rain. The rancher held up the letter once more. "My wife left names." He began reading. One family, then another, then another. Every name belonged to people with land, money, or influence. Several faces in the crowd turned pale. An older ranch owner backed away. "She's lying." The sheriff spoke before anyone else. "No," the man pointed at him. "You expect us to believe you now? I don't expect forgiveness." "Then why confess?" "Because children deserved better than my fear." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She carried a faded baby blanket folded across her arms. "They took my little girl." Everyone turned toward her. "They said she wandered into the river." She held up the blanket. "I found this beside the old well years later." Another woman joined her, a widow with tired eyes. "My son disappeared." "What happened?" "They said he ran away." "Did he?" "No." A former servant stepped beside them. "I cleaned the governor's house." The crowd stared. "What did you see?" "Locked rooms." "What else?" "Children." Gasps spread through the gathering. The servant continued. "I heard crying at night." "Why didn't you speak?" "I was told my own children would disappear." An elderly mother stepped forward. "My husband worked for one of the old families." "What did he know?" "He came home covered in dirt." "What was he digging?" "Graves." The pastor closed his eyes. "I blessed those graves. You believed them?" "I wanted to." The elderly woman from the tunnel shook her head. "Belief isn't the same as truth." More people stepped forward. A blacksmith, a schoolteacher, a stable hand. Each carried another memory, another lie, another missing child. Each story fit the next until the silence that had protected the town finally shattered. The rancher looked across the crowd. "You all knew pieces." The widow answered. "We were too afraid." "You aren't alone anymore." The sheriff stepped beside him. "Neither are you." The sound of approaching horses echoed across the road. Everyone turned. A line of armed riders entered the clearing. The governor rode at the front. His coat looked spotless, his smile did not. He studied the gathering calmly. "So, nobody answered. You've caused enough trouble." The rancher folded the letter and slipped it safely inside his coat. The governor pointed toward him. "Hand over the letter." "No!" "Hand over the woman." "No!" The boy. "No!" The governor sighed. "You don't understand. I understand enough." The armed riders spread into a line. Hands rested on rifles, several townspeople stepped backward. Fear returned, the governor smiled. "That's better." The rancher never moved. The governor looked at the sheriff. "Arrest him." The sheriff remained still. "I won't. You served me. I served fear. And now I serve the truth." The governor's smile disappeared. "You'll hang with him, if that's the price." The governor looked toward the crowd. "Anyone standing beside this rancher will lose land, work, and protection." A merchant lowered his head. A farmer looked toward his family. Nobody stepped forward. The governor laughed softly. "I thought so." The rancher looked around at every frightened face. Then he spoke only 2 words. "Not anymore." The widow walked first. She stepped beside the rancher, then the former servant, then the elderly mother, then the blacksmith. The pastor crossed the clearing without another word. The sheriff stood beside them. Ellie quietly slipped his hand into the rancher's. One by one, more townspeople moved forward. No speeches, no shouting, only footsteps. When the last farmer joined them, the governor looked across the gathering and realized he was no longer facing one stubborn rancher. He was facing the entire town standing quietly behind him. The entire town stood quietly behind him. The governor looked from one face to another before a slow smile spread across his own. Then he laughed. The sound carried across the clearing, sharp enough to break the silence. "You'll hang." Nobody moved. The governor looked at the rancher. "You've made your choice." The rancher answered calmly. "So have you." The governor pointed toward the armed riders. "Take them." None of the riders moved. They glanced toward the sheriff instead. The sheriff stepped forward. "No!" The governor frowned. "What did you say?" "No! You've forgotten who gives orders." The sheriff slowly reached up and unpinned the silver badge from his chest. He looked at it for a long moment. "I wore this too long." He threw it into the dirt. The badge landed beside the old blood-stained one taken from the well. "I testify." Everything changed. The riders lowered their rifles. The governor stared in disbelief. "You fool!" The sheriff shook his head. "I've been one for years." He turned toward the crowd. "I know where the records are." The pastor stepped forward, the wooden chest. The sheriff nodded, beneath the church floor. The rancher looked at several young men standing nearby. "Bring it." They ran toward town without another word. The governor backed his horse away. "This proves nothing," the elderly woman answered him. "It proves enough. It proves stories. It proves your fear." Minutes later, the young men returned carrying an old wooden chest covered in dust. The lock had already been broken. The rancher opened it. Inside rested ledgers, letters, land records, birth records, lists of names. Every page carried signatures, dates, payments. The sheriff picked up one ledger. "My handwriting." He closed his eyes. "I logged every child." The crowd gasped. The rancher opened another book. Each missing child had been listed beside amounts of money. The room for family names had often been left blank. The widow covered her mouth. "They counted children like cattle." The governor pointed wildly. "They're forged." "No." The pastor stepped beside the rancher. "I recognize these pages." The governor turned toward several wealthy landowners standing behind him. "Tell them." None answered. "You signed these." One old ranch owner finally spoke. "We had no choice," another shouted back. "You did. You took the money too. You brought the wagons. You buried the truth." Soon the old families argued among themselves, voices rose, accusations spread. Years of silence collapsed beneath their own fear. One pointed at another. "He planned it?" "No, you did. You met with the governor. You signed first. I only followed. You always followed. The governor looked around desperately. Stop talking. Nobody listened. The riders who had arrived with him quietly stepped away. One removed the governor's extra rifle from the saddle. Another untied his horse from the group. One by one, they abandoned him. The governor looked around. You stand with criminals? One rider answered. No, we stand with children. The governor's shoulders fell. The rancher looked toward the sheriff. What now? The sheriff raised both hands. I surrender. The rancher rendered to the law. The sheriff nodded. I do. Several deputies from neighboring towns rode into the clearing after hearing the church bell ringing without pause. They listened quietly while the rancher handed them the ledgers, the letter, and the blood-stained badge. One deputy looked through the records. This is enough. He turned toward the governor. Step down. I refuse. You no longer have that choice. The governor reached for his revolver. 3 deputies aimed first. He slowly removed his hand. Metal cuffs closed around his wrists. The old families watched as more arrests followed. No cheering came from the crowd, only relief. Justice felt quieter than revenge. The rancher looked toward Eli. The boy stood beside the elderly woman. His eyes rested on one of the old record books. He slowly walked toward it. I want to see. The rancher handed him the ledger. The child carefully turned each page. His fingers stopped beside one name. He stared at it. His breathing changed. I remember. The rancher stepped closer. What is it? The boy touched the faded ink. Elias. He swallowed. Elias Carter. The elderly woman smiled through tears. That's your name. The boy repeated it softly. Elias Carter. As though speaking it brought another piece of himself home, the rancher smiled. It suits you. Elias looked toward the arrested governor. His face remained calm. The rancher expected anger. Instead, the boy asked one quiet question. Will children be safe now? Nobody answered immediately. The deputies looked at one another. The pastor lowered his eyes. The sheriff stood silently with his hands bound. Promises had been broken too many times. The rancher slowly knelt until he stood eye to eye with the boy. They will. You know that? I know this. What? No one is fighting alone anymore. Elias searched his face. You promise? The rancher nodded. I promise. The boy reached forward and hugged him. The rancher wrapped both arms around the child without hesitation. Behind them, the deputies led the governor and the old families away. The sheriff walked beside them without resisting. The church bell finally fell silent. The crowd slowly began returning to their homes. Some carried records. Others carried forgotten names. Mothers held their children a little closer. Widows walked together instead of alone. The elderly woman stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the sun settle beyond the hills. The rancher looked toward his own home in the distance. He rested one hand gently on Elias's shoulder. Ready? The boy nodded. Yes. Together they turned away from the well, the arrests, and the years of silence. Without speaking another word, father and son began the long walk home together. Together they turned away from the well, the arrests, and the years of silence. Without speaking another word, father and son walked through the ranch gate. Everything looked the same. The fences still leaned in familiar places. The fields stretched across the valley exactly as they always had. The porch still creaked beneath every step, yet nothing felt the same. Not because the land had changed. Because they had Elias look toward the burned barn. It still smells like smoke. The rancher nodded, not for long. The next morning they began rebuilding. Neighbors arrived before sunrise carrying lumber, nails, and fresh beams. Men lifted broken walls together. Women cooked meals beneath the shade of old trees. Children carried water and laughed without looking over their shoulders. The rancher paused to watch them. Months earlier, nobody would have come. Now nobody stayed away. A young widow handed him a hammer. You don't have to do this alone. I know. You taught us that. He smiled quietly. We taught each other. Day after day, the barn slowly returned. Fresh boards replaced blackened beams. A new roof covered the stalls. The horses settled inside without fear. One afternoon, Elias stood in the doorway, watching the last plank being nailed into place. "We finished." The rancher looked around. "We started." The boy smiled. There was still more work ahead. Inside the house, another change quietly unfolded. The room that had remained closed for years no longer gathered dust. Fresh curtains hung over the window. Clean blankets covered the bed. Books rested neatly on a shelf. The old wooden horse waited on the table. One wheel still leaned sideways. Elias picked it up. "It wobbles. It always did. Can we fix it?" The rancher nodded. Together they sanded the broken wood. They shaped a new wheel. The rancher showed Elias how to smooth the edges. The boy carefully painted it. When they finished, he rolled the horse across the floor. It traveled in a perfectly straight line. Elias laughed. "So much better." The rancher watched the toy disappear beneath the bed. "So are we." The weeks passed without breaking the quiet rhythm of the valley. Justice continued its slow work. The sheriff accepted prison without asking for mercy. Before leaving, he visited the ranch one last time. He stood on the porch with his hat in his hands. "I don't expect forgiveness." The rancher looked at him. "I know. I'll spend the rest of my life remembering." "You should." The sheriff nodded. "I will." He looked toward Elias. "I'm sorry," the boy answered gently. "I hope you mean it." "I do." The sheriff walked away alone. Nobody stopped him. Far away, the governor stood before a crowded courtroom. Witness after witness spoke. The elderly woman told her story. The widow spoke. The former servant spoke. The hidden records were read aloud. The sentence came at last. The governor lost everything he had used to frighten others. His title, his land, his freedom. The old families watched their power disappear beside him. Some were imprisoned. Others lost the estates built upon stolen lives. The valley slowly learned how to breathe without fear. Not every wound healed, but every lie no longer ruled. The women who had spoken first refused to stop there. Together they repaired an abandoned farmhouse near the edge of town. Children without families soon filled its rooms. Warm beds replaced cold ground. Fresh bread replaced hunger. Laughter replaced silence. The elderly woman became the home's first caretaker. One afternoon she welcomed another frightened child through the front door. "You are safe." The little girl looked uncertain. "For how long?" The woman smiled. "Forever if you want." Word spread beyond the valley. People arrived carrying blankets, books, and food instead of secrets. The rancher often delivered supplies with Elias beside him. On one visit, a small boy held out half a loaf of bread. "You look hungry." Elias smiled. "You keep it. We can share." The rancher watched quietly. The kindness that had once saved one child had begun saving others. Late one evening, father and son walked together toward the small cemetery above the church. The air was calm. The grass moved gently around the simple stone where the rancher's wife rested. He placed fresh wildflowers beside the grave. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Elias broke the silence. "I wish she knew." The rancher looked at the headstone. "She does. You really believe that?" "Yes." Elias nodded slowly. "I hope she knows she saved me." The rancher smiled through quiet tears. "I think she always hoped she would." They stood together until the sun slipped behind the hills. As they turned to leave, the rancher stopped walking. "Elias?" "Yeah?" He took a slow breath. "Would you like my name?" The boy looked down at the path beneath his boots. A gentle smile crossed his face. "I already have it." The rancher looked surprised. "You do?" "You've been my father since the bread." The rancher could not speak for several seconds. Then he rested one hand against the boy's shoulder. Together they started down the hill. The lights of the ranch glowed warmly in the distance. Halfway home, Elias looked up. "Dad?" The rancher turned toward him. "Yeah?" The boy smiled. "I'm home." The rancher could not answer. He simply kept his hand on the boy's shoulder as they walked side by side toward the house. They climbed the porch steps together. The front door opened, then quietly closed behind them. For the first time in many years, The ranch no longer felt empty. End.